Some people do not feel lonely, they feel separate. They move through crowds without absorbing them, as if observing a species rather than belonging to it. You may call them introverted, quiet, antisocial, or misunderstood, but that description is too comfortable. Because what if they are not withdrawing from the world, but seeing something others cannot? Loners often notice patterns others rush past, contradictions people disguise with laughter, subtle tensions beneath ordinary conversations. They watch friendships form and dissolve like rehearsed performances, predictable, fragile, strangely transactional. They sense invisible hierarchies in every room and rarely feel impressed by them. You think they are detached, but what if they are simply unconvinced? Unconvinced by what people chase, by what they fear, by what they pretend not to notice. And if that is true, then the unsettling question emerges quietly. Are loners isolated? Or are they observing something the rest of us are avoiding? Because once you see what they see, returning becomes difficult. And that is where this begins. Imagine a person who attends every gathering, smiles at the right moments, laughs at predictable jokes, and leaves early, feeling quietly relieved once the door closes behind them. Picture someone who scrolls through endless conversations online, replying carefully, shaping their image, curating impressions, believing they are managing how others see them. Imagine a colleague who speaks only when necessary, measures every sentence, avoids conflict skillfully, convinced that silence keeps life stable and controlled. From the outside, each of them appears deliberate, composed, perhaps even strategic in their distance from others. They believe their restraint protects them from chaos, from embarrassment, from the unpredictable nature of other people. But what feels like control is often something subtler, something less intentional than it appears. Because control suggests choice, yet many loners did not consciously choose the lens through which they see the world. It formed gradually, through moments too small to register as turning points. A dismissive laugh in childhood, a betrayal wrapped in casual indifference, a room that felt colder than expected. Over time, observation replaced participation, not as rebellion, but as adaptation. They began studying interactions the way others study weather patterns, noting shifts in tone, sudden silences, subtle exclusions. This vigilance felt intelligent, almost superior, because it reduced surprise. And reduced surprise feels like safety. Safety becomes structure, and structure begins to resemble control. Yet beneath that structure is a quiet assumption that people are unpredictable in ways that require distance. Distance then feels rational, even wise. The loner starts believing they are choosing solitude freely, as if it were a philosophical stance. They tell themselves they prefer depth over noise, authenticity over performance, silence over superficiality. And sometimes that is true, but sometimes preference is simply protection wearing intellectual clothing. What looks like independence may be avoidance refined into identity. What looks like clarity may be hyper-awareness shaped by earlier discomfort. The illusion of control grows stronger because it rarely gets challenged. Others accept the quiet persona without probing beneath it. The loner is left undisturbed, reinforcing the belief that withdrawal equals mastery. Yet mastery would require freedom to engage or disengage without emotional consequence. And that freedom is not always present. Because when solitude becomes the only space that feels stable, it is no longer fully chosen. It is maintained. And anything that must be maintained carries tension. That tension is subtle, almost invisible, until something disrupts it. And when it does, the first crack begins to show. If this is already making sense to you, it means you're starting to notice patterns most people never see. Subscribe, and let's keep exploring how the mind really works. Now, this is where things start to get uncomfortable. Imagine a person who rehearses social exits mentally, notes each movement, times goodbyes precisely, then walks away feeling both relieved and oddly empty. Picture someone who overhears a compliment aimed at another, catalogs its sincerity, stores the detail as evidence, and later replays the moment quietly alone. They are not dramatic in their withdrawal. Their leaving is small, almost polite, a pause rather than a rupture in the day. That pause is often the first place a different psychological truth takes hold, an unspoken realization about how other people allocate attention. Attention, once noticed as scarce and selective, becomes an object of observation. The loner charts who receives it, how it is offered, and why. This mode of observation is not neutral. It gradually acquires moral color, judging what attention reveals about value, loyalty, and predictability in others. The first crack opens when observation ceases to be curiosity and becomes evidence. Evidence that other people behave according to scripts the loner finds thin. When scripts repeat, faith in spontaneity erodes, and every encounter looks like reenactment, a rehearsal where gestures are learned, smiles practiced, and apologies delayed. At this point, suspicion is not paranoid, it is interpretive, a lens that reads small inconsistencies as confirmations, not coincidences, of deeper patterns. The loner's reasoning sharpens, but it does not become gentler, rather it becomes more economical, pruning social allowances that once felt automatic and comfortable. This pruning offers clarity, a tidy internal world where surprises are minimized, but clarity also narrows possibility, making each deviation stand out painfully bright. Contradictions then alarm in a new way, because the loner expects consistency, and inconsistency feels like a social error that must be understood or avoided. Sometimes the crack is triggered by betrayal, a casual lie, a friend who disappears, an invitation that never arrives, each small fracture extending the gap. Other times the crack forms slowly, through accumulations of small slights, misaligned expectations, or the sense that intimacy requires too high a transactional cost. When the first crack widens, actions that once seemed minor reveal significance, leaving the loner to reassess relationships without the comfort of ritual or excuse. This reassessment is experienced quietly, internally, like a structural inspection of a building, calculations made in silence, decisions postponed but increasingly inevitable. And as the gap grows, solitude is reframed, not as preference, but as a safer landscape, and this points toward conditioning written into brain circuits. Imagine a person who learns to withdraw in response to discomfort, creating small routines of retreat that gradually become their default orientation toward others. They practice subtle avoidance, stepping aside from conversations, mastering neutral facial expressions, rehearsing polite excuses, all of which train the body to expect solitude. This early conditioning is rarely intentional. It accumulates through repeated emotional outcomes, each confirmed reaction reinforcing the next defensive movement towards space and distance. The brain records contingency, not philosophy. It notes that certain behaviors reliably reduce social pain, and it files those behaviors under useful responses. Neuroscience labels this learning as associative conditioning, the mind linking stimuli and outcomes, not through judgment, but through probability and repetition over time. Each time an interaction ends predictably poorly, the brain strengthens pathways favoring withdrawal, making solitude not merely preferable, but neurologically efficient and familiar. Efficiency in neural terms means less metabolic cost, fewer surprises, predictable rewards, the brain embracing patterns that conserve energy and reduce conflict likelihood. Over months and years, these patterns travel from temporary strategies into default neural habits, shaping attention, affect, and the activation thresholds for social engagement. The conditioned loner experiences social environments through pre-filtered expectations, anticipating rejection or disappointment before it occurs, which then colors perception and memory selectively. This selective perception is not arbitrary, it is functional, protecting the organism from perceived threats, while simultaneously narrowing the window for pleasant social surprises. Conditioning also rewires reward systems. Small evidence of appreciation may fail to register because the neural reward thresholds have shifted, demanding stronger signals to register joy. Consequently, compliments feel thin, invitations feel like obligations, warmth is often measured rather than felt, because the brain has learned to discount superficial positive signals. The body carries this learning too: tension in shoulders, a reflexive gaze downwards, microgestures that conserve emotional exposure, all controlled by circuits shaped through conditioning. Importantly, this conditioning often begins in contexts where silence or withdrawal was adaptive, perhaps safety during conflict, or preserved dignity after humiliation, not inherently pathological. As adaptation becomes habitual, it will be interpreted as character rather than contingency. The The loner internalizes withdrawal as part of identity, a trait rather than a response. That reinterpretation is powerful because identities command behavior strongly. They organize memory and motives to fit the adopted narrative, making change more difficult without contradiction. Yet the brain is not static. It constantly optimizes, reinforcing strategies that reduced past harm and punishing those that increased risk. Therefore, solitude can feel like intelligent calibration. If you've noticed this in your own life, describe what happened. Someone reading may recognize themselves in it, a quiet echo of experience. This invitation is not seeking counsel. It is a mirror held briefly for recognition, a chance to see patterns outside of explanation or remedy. Understanding conditioning reframes solitude, not as failure, but as a learned response shaped by experience, context, and neural economy, a survival strategy in social terms. When explained clinically, the narrative loses accusation, becoming a description of systems adapting, the brain minimizing surprises, and prioritizing predictable outcomes for self-preservation. Conditioning also explains why repeated social exposure may not immediately alter comfort. The neural thresholds for reward and threat require prolonged recalibration to bend. Because habits live in circuits, the brain resists change softly. It slowly reassigns salience when new patterns consistently deliver different outcomes over extended time frames. The loner therefore experiences social attempts as uneven experiments, fleeting successes that the brain may dismiss as anomalies rather than evidence of change, maintaining the default. At times, the conditioned mind misinterprets generosity, overlaying past patterns on present kindness, which produces a cautious distance that feels rational to the loner's internal logic. From the outside, this looks like stubbornness, aloofness, a refusal to participate in communal warmth, but inside it is a protective algorithm operating under past constraints. And yet the brain also benefits from this behavior. It avoids overload, conserves cognitive resources, and reduces the noise of conflicting social demands daily, smoothing experience. That benefit is not moral. It is pragmatic, and it quietly explains why solitude persists even when loneliness stirs, and it leads toward the hidden emotional payoff next. Solitude is rarely maintained without reward, even when that reward is subtle and difficult to admit openly. For many loners, the hidden payoff is a preserved sense of autonomy, an internal sovereignty untouched by negotiation, compromise, or emotional dependency. Autonomy feels clean compared to relational complexity. It requires fewer adjustments, fewer apologies, fewer moments of explaining internal states to others. In isolation, identity appears coherent, uncontested, free from the distortions that arise when other perspectives press against it. There is also a quieter reward, a sense of perceptual superiority, the belief that distance provides clearer vision than immersion ever could. From this vantage point, group enthusiasm can look naive, shared outrage predictable, collective trends almost mechanical in their repetition. The loner experiences a subtle elevation, not loudly declared, but privately felt as intellectual or emotional independence from the crowd. This elevation stabilizes self-esteem, especially when earlier experiences chipped away at trust or belonging. By choosing distance, the loner reframes exclusion as preference, converting potential rejection into deliberate detachment. That conversion protects dignity, because it is easier to reject first than to risk being overlooked. There is also control over vulnerability, a controlled exposure that limits how much of the inner world becomes accessible to others. Limited exposure reduces the risk of misunderstanding, and misunderstanding has often carried a high emotional cost. Another payoff lies in predictability. Solitude follows rules the loner understands, while relationships introduce variables that cannot be fully managed. Predictability calms the nervous system, reinforcing the belief that withdrawal is rational rather than reactive. Yet these payoffs accumulate interest, each benefit strengthening commitment to the pattern, even when loneliness surfaces intermittently. Loneliness is then reinterpreted, not as a signal to engage, but as evidence that others cannot meet internal standards. Standards rise quietly over time, narrowing the field of acceptable connection, reinforcing the narrative that depth is rare and compromise unworthy. In this way, the hidden payoff sustains itself, preserving ego integrity while limiting emotional exposure. What appears as detachment from the outside often feels like coherence from within, a carefully maintained internal order. And once coherence becomes central to self-concept, protecting it can matter more than expanding it, leading toward a deeper entanglement with identity. Imagine a person who describes themselves consistently as different, independent, not built for ordinary social rhythms, repeating this narrative until it feels factual. They recount past misunderstandings as proof, collect stories of disconnection, and organize memory around moments that confirm their separateness. Over time, the story hardens, shifting from observation to definition, from something that happened to something they fundamentally are. Identity forms through repetition, not sudden revelation, and the loner repeats the narrative of being apart until it becomes the most stable self-description available. This identity offers clarity. It explains discomfort, rationalizes distance, and frames solitude as alignment rather than avoidance. Yet identity also narrows flexibility, because behaviors inconsistent with it feel like betrayal of self rather than exploration. If connection unexpectedly feels good, it may create cognitive tension, challenging the established narrative of permanent separateness. To resolve this tension, the mind may reinterpret positive experiences as temporary anomalies, preserving the dominant identity intact. The identity trap operates quietly because it feels authentic, and authenticity is rarely questioned once claimed. Statements like "I am just not wired for people" or "I see through social games" function as anchors, stabilizing the self-concept against contradiction. Anchors resist movement, and any evidence that threatens them is filtered, minimized, or reframed to maintain internal consistency. If you've noticed this in your own life, describe what happened. Someone reading may recognize themselves in it. This reflection is not a call to change. It is an invitation to observe how identity narratives solidify around repeated interpretations of experience. When identity centers on separateness, belonging can feel like compromise, as though connection dilutes clarity or weakens independence. The loner may then defend isolation passionately, not because it always satisfies, but because it protects the constructed self from revision. Revision is destabilizing. It forces reevaluation of past conclusions, and the mind prefers continuity over disruption even when continuity limits growth. As identity tightens around the label of loner, behaviors align automatically, choices reinforce the narrative, and exceptions become increasingly rare. Friends may interpret this as consistency, yet internally it can feel like obligation, maintaining a persona that once began as adaptation. The trap is subtle because it rewards coherence, and coherence feels psychologically safe even when it restricts possibility. Eventually, the question shifts from why someone is alone to who they would be without the certainty of being the loner. And that question unsettles the foundation, pointing toward a reframing that does not deny difference, but examines it differently. Seeing the world differently does not automatically mean seeing it more accurately. It may simply mean seeing it through a lens shaped by specific repetitions. The loner often interprets social behavior as performance, yet performance is not always deception. It can also be coordination within shared cultural scripts. What appears superficial from a distance may serve stabilizing functions within groups, reducing friction, signaling safety, and enabling cooperation without constant vulnerability. The loner's heightened pattern recognition can detect inconsistencies quickly, but rapid detection does not always equal comprehensive understanding of motive or context. Distance sharpens certain perceptions while dulling others, amplifying subtle tensions, yet muting the quiet bonds that form through ordinary repetition. It is possible to be correct about patterns and still incomplete about people, because human behavior contains contradiction without collapsing into falseness. The belief that others are predictable can coexist with the reality that individuals still surprise when given unfiltered space over time. Reframing begins by recognizing that observation itself is participatory. The act of watching changes what is noticed and remembered. When one expects shallowness, evidence accumulates efficiently, confirming the expectation while overlooking moments that resist the narrative. This is not deliberate bias, it is cognitive economy. the mind conserving energy by reinforcing established interpretations rather than recalculating continuously. The loner's clarity about group dynamics may therefore reflect consistency of exposure, not necessarily superiority of insight. Groups contain hierarchy and imitation, but they also contain reciprocity, repair, and quiet loyalty that rarely announces itself loudly. Solitude provides coherence, yet coherence can exist alongside partial vision, shaped by what the observer chooses or unconsciously prefers to track. Reframing does not require abandoning difference. It only suggests that difference might be one perspective among several rather than final authority. The world may not be as scripted as it appears, even if patterns repeat, because repetition can arise from shared needs rather than manipulation. Humans seek belonging reflexively, and what looks like conformity may be negotiation between individuality and collective survival pressures. The loner, positioned outside this negotiation, sees its compromises clearly, yet may underestimate the emotional sustenance it provides participants. Seeing differently can be a strength without being an indictment of others, a variation in vantage rather than proof of mass blindness. When difference is reframed as variation instead of elevation, the tension between isolation and engagement softens slightly. And in that softening, perception shifts subtly, preparing the ground for a quieter internal movement that follows. Awareness of conditioning, payoff, and identity does not immediately dissolve them. It simply changes how they are held internally. The loner may begin to notice moments of automatic withdrawal, observing the reflex without instantly labeling it as wisdom or necessity. This observation is calm rather than corrective, a subtle pause between impulse and interpretation. In that pause, the certainty of separateness can feel less rigid, more like a familiar habit than an unchangeable truth. Social encounters may still exhaust, misunderstandings may still occur, but they are no longer absolute proof of incompatibility. Instead, they appear as data points within a larger pattern that includes variation, ambiguity, and occasional warmth. The quiet shift involves recognizing that perception and identity have been collaborating closely, reinforcing each other through repetition. When this collaboration becomes visible, it loses some of its invisibility, and invisibility was part of its power. Solitude may remain valuable, not as fortress, but as preference among alternatives rather than the only safe terrain available. The loner might sense that seeing the world differently does not obligate permanent distance from it. Difference can exist without hard borders, allowing observation and participation to alternate without threatening coherence. This shift is not dramatic. It does not announce transformation. It simply loosens the grip of inevitability. What once felt like fixed architecture begins to resemble adjustable structure, capable of subtle reconfiguration over time. And when inevitability fades, even slightly, a new question forms quietly beneath the surface, waiting for reflection in the final mirror. At some point, the question is no longer why loners see the world differently, but what that difference protects internally. Protection is rarely random. It forms around earlier conclusions about safety, worth, and the reliability of other people. When those conclusions solidify, they influence what feels believable, shaping perception long before conscious interpretation begins. The loner often prides themselves on realism, yet realism is filtered through prior emotional calibrations that quietly determine thresholds of trust. In this mirror, the world appears shallow, inconsistent, overly performative, but the reflection also contains the observer's own guarded structure. Guarded structures do not announce themselves as fear. They present as discernment, independence, or refusal to compromise. The line between discernment and defense can blur subtly, especially when distance has repeatedly reduced discomfort in the past. Looking into this mirror requires acknowledging that perception is reciprocal. The world seen is partly constructed by the seer. If one expects performance, performance becomes salient, while sincerity may require longer exposure to register fully. If one anticipates disappointment, minor flaws confirm expectation, while quiet loyalty may remain understated and therefore overlooked. The final mirror does not accuse. It simply reflects the interplay between expectation and evidence. Loners may see patterns others miss, yet they may also miss patterns visible only through sustained mutual presence. Difference in vision does not imply defect, but it does invite examination of how vision was formed. When formation becomes visible, the narrative of separateness can loosen without collapsing entirely. What remains is not forced belonging, but awareness that the lens itself has history and intention. And awareness, even without immediate change, alters the way the world feels in subtle increments. Loners see the world differently, not because they stand above it, but because they stand slightly apart from its rhythms. That distance sharpens perception of hierarchy, repetition, and subtle social negotiations unfolding continuously beneath ordinary conversation. It also amplifies caution, reinforcing narratives of independence that once served protective functions. Throughout this exploration, the focus has not been on correcting solitude, but on understanding the systems that sustain it. Conditioning shaped responses, hidden payoffs preserved dignity, identity stabilized the story of being separate. None of these mechanisms are irrational. They are adaptive patterns formed through experience and reinforced by internal coherence. Yet adaptation can become architecture, and architecture can feel permanent even when it was built for earlier climates. Seeing this does not demand demolition. It only introduces flexibility into what once felt immovable. The world remains complex, sometimes shallow, sometimes unexpectedly generous, rarely fitting a single conclusion completely. Loners may continue to notice what others overlook, yet they may also begin noticing the lens through which they notice. That subtle double awareness changes the experience of standing apart, transforming it from certainty into observation. If this reflection felt uncomfortably familiar, it may indicate that the mirror held something recognizable rather than imposed. Psyhow exists to explore these quiet structures of identity, not to prescribe solutions, but to illuminate hidden patterns beneath ordinary life. The next time you find yourself observing from the edge of a room, notice not only what others are doing, but what your perception assumes. Somewhere in that quiet noticing, a new interpretation may be forming, not louder, but more precise.